Before this story starts, I want you to think about the place where you work or study, the building you move through every day without really looking at it. Because sometimes the scariest changes aren't sudden or dramatic. They're quiet additions you accept without questioning. And once you realize something doesn't belong, it's usually already too late to leave. No one noticed the new floor at first, because office buildings change all the time in small, forgettable ways. Signs get replaced, walls get repainted, directories get updated. So when the elevator paused briefly between the 6th and 7th floors one Monday morning and opened its doors to a softly lit hallway labeled Floor 7B, everyone assumed it had always been there. And that assumption might have lasted if not for the fact that none of the building's blueprints listed a 7th floor at all, let alone one with clean carpeting, identical cubicles, and people already working quietly at their desks, typing emails, filling spreadsheets, sipping coffee like they were right where they belonged. And when asked who they worked for, they answered calmly that they were part of the same company, just a different team. A reasonable explanation that stopped most questions. Until someone checked the employee directory and realized there were no records for anyone assigned to 7B. No access logs, no payroll entries, no onboarding files, and yet every morning more people appeared on that floor, always polite, always focused, always productive, never complaining, never leaving early. And the unsettling part wasn't their presence, it was how natural everything felt. Like the building itself had quietly decided this was where certain people were supposed to end up. At first, the 6th floor treated 7B like a curiosity rather than a threat, a strange quirk of the building that didn't demand answers as long as work continued uninterrupted. Because productivity has a way of dulling suspicion, and the people assigned to 7B, if assigned was even the right word, performed exceptionally well, responding to emails faster than anyone else, resolving issues before they escalated, anticipating needs before managers articulated them. And that alone would have earned them praise, if not for the fact that no one could remember seeing them arrive on their first day. No introductions, no onboarding meetings, just a growing number of familiar faces quietly relocating upstairs. And what bothered me most wasn't that people disappeared into 7B, it was how little anyone seemed to miss them afterward. Because their absence didn't create gaps, their tasks were still completed, their calendars updated automatically, their projects progressing as if they'd never left. And when I finally rode the elevator up there myself, telling myself it was just another floor, just another hallway, the doors opened with a soft chime that felt too deliberate, revealing a space that looked newer than the rest of the building, cleaner, quieter, with carpeting that muted every footstep and overhead lights that never flickered. And the people working there smiled politely, without curiosity, without surprise, like they had expected me. And when I asked one of them how long they'd been on 7B, they paused just long enough for something unspoken to pass between us before answering that time worked differently up there, that deadlines felt closer but less stressful, that expectations were clearer once you stopped thinking about what you might want and focused on what needed to be done. And as unsettling as that sounded, a part of me understood what they meant. Because standing there, I felt an unfamiliar calm settle over me, a sense that if I stayed long enough, everything noisy and unfinished in my head would finally quiet down. And that was the moment I realized the floor wasn't hiding itself from us at all. It was waiting for us to be ready to notice it, waiting for the moment when exhaustion outweighed resistance, when relief felt more important than choice. Because the elevator doors didn't try to close behind me. They stayed open patiently, like the building was giving me time to decide whether I wanted to step fully inside or pretend I'd never seen where the hallway really led. I wish I could say I stepped back into the elevator and left 7B untouched. But curiosity mixed with exhaustion is a powerful thing, and once I crossed the threshold fully, the doors slid shut behind me without a sound, sealing the hallway in a way that felt less like being trapped and more like being included, because everything on that floor was designed to remove friction. Every question answered before it formed, every task broken down into simple, achievable steps. And as I walked past rows of desks, I noticed how familiar the people looked. Not strangers at all, but coworkers I'd known for years, just simplified somehow. Their expressions softer, their movements efficient, their conversations reduced to quiet confirmations rather than discussions. And when I checked the time on my phone, it flickered briefly before displaying a meeting reminder I didn't remember accepting, scheduled indefinitely. And that's when I noticed the doors at the far end of the hallway, the ones I hadn't seen earlier, each labeled with department names that didn't exist anymore. Teams dissolved in past restructures, projects canceled years ago, and as I passed one door, I heard typing from the other side, steady and patient, and realized with a jolt that those projects hadn't ended, they'd been relocated. Absorbed into a place where unfinished work didn't die, it just continued without complaint. And the calm I'd felt earlier deepened into something heavier, more persuasive, like the floor was offering relief, not from stress, but from choice itself. Because here, no one worried about career paths or burnout or failure. They simply fulfilled roles that had been waiting for them. And when someone gently touched my arm to guide me toward an empty desk already set up with my name on it, keyboard warm as if recently used, I felt a brief spike of panic followed immediately by understanding. Because the hardest part of work was never the labor, it was deciding how much of yourself you were willing to give. And 7B didn't ask that question at all, it answered it for you. And as I sat down and the screen in front of me lit up with tasks I somehow recognized, I realized the floor didn't steal people, it relieved them. And the only thing it demanded in return was that once you accepted its order, you never tried to remember what it felt like to leave. I don't know how long I sat there before I noticed that no one ever stood up unless the floor wanted them to, because movement on 7B followed a rhythm that wasn't written anywhere, chairs rolling back in near-perfect unison, footsteps aligning just enough to avoid sound, conversations starting and ending without overlap. And the longer I watched, the more I realized the floor wasn't quiet because people were focused, it was quiet because it was listening, adjusting itself constantly to keep everything balanced. And that became undeniable when the lights dimmed slightly. Not enough to suggest night, just enough to signal a transition. And the work didn't stop, it reorganized, tasks shifting automatically from screen to screen, names changing at the top of documents as people were reassigned without being asked. And I felt a pressure build behind my eyes, not painful, just insistent, urging me to stop questioning the process and let the pattern carry me the way it carried everyone else. But then something broke that illusion. A small human mistake that shouldn't have existed there, because 2 desks down, a woman hesitated before typing, fingers hovering over the keyboard like she'd forgotten the next step. And for a fraction of a second, the floor reacted, lights flickering, screens refreshing too fast, a low hum passing through the walls, and everyone else froze, not looking at her, not looking at anything, as if attention itself had become dangerous. And when she finally typed the wrong entry, the hum deepened, doors at the end of the hallway unlocking simultaneously. And I understood then that 7B tolerated people only as long as they fit cleanly into its flow, that hesitation wasn't just noticed, it was corrected. And the woman was gently guided away toward one of the newly opened doors, not struggling, not protesting, simply relieved to have the uncertainty taken from her. And as the door closed behind her and the system stabilized again, the calm returned, stronger than before, heavier, more persuasive, and I felt the floor waiting for me to falter next, to offer me the same solution. Because once you see how smoothly everything runs without doubt, the idea of resisting it starts to feel less like freedom and more like sabotage. After the door closed behind her, no one spoke about what had happened, not even in the subtle ways people usually acknowledge uncomfortable moments, because acknowledgement itself felt like a kind of resistance. And I realized then that 7B didn't erase people abruptly, it absorbed their uncertainty first, smoothing them down until there was nothing left to disrupt the rhythm. And that realization made every small human impulse feel dangerous. Every pause, every second thought, every instinct to look away from the screen. And I became acutely aware of how the floor anticipated those impulses before I acted on them. My monitor refreshing just as my attention drifted, my chair shifting slightly forward when I leaned back, the temperature adjusting to keep me alert but calm. And the most unsettling part was how good it felt. How easy it was to stop thinking about whether this was wrong and focus instead on how efficient everything had become. Because outside 7B, work was messy and exhausting and uncertain. But here, the building carried the burden of decision-making for you. And I understood why people didn't try to leave, because leaving meant reclaiming responsibility for every unfinished thought you'd been relieved of. And yet, despite that pull, I couldn't ignore the growing sense that the floor was tightening, that each correction made it less tolerant of deviation, because the hallway doors were opening more often now, quietly cycling people through in ways no one commented on. And I started noticing empty desks that stayed empty, screens dark but warm, as if someone had only just stepped away and wouldn't be coming back. And when I glanced at the elevator indicator mounted near the ceiling, I felt a cold knot form in my stomach because the number it displayed wasn't fixed anymore. It flickered between levels that didn't exist, sometimes showing 7B, sometimes something lower, something deeper. And I realized the floor wasn't stable. It was growing, extending itself downward as well as up, creating space not for more workers, but for more corrections. In the moment that finally broke my focus came when my own name appeared at the top of a document I didn't remember opening, followed by a simple instruction I hadn't seen before, highlighted softly, patiently, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. Please remain seated. And in that instant, I knew that if I didn't stand up right then, before the floor finished deciding where I belonged, I might never remember what standing up on my own terms had felt like at all. I stood up anyway, and the sound my chair made against the carpet was small but catastrophic, because on a floor built to erase friction, even the slightest resistance echoed like a fault line, and everything reacted at once, not violently but decisively. Lights brightening into a sterile white that erased shadows, screens around me refreshing in rapid succession as tasks reassigned themselves away from my name, the low hum in the walls deepening until it felt less like sound and more like pressure, like the building was closing its grip, and every person on the floor turned toward me in the same unhurried motion, eyes calm, expressions unchanged, attention absolute, not alarmed but corrective, as if I had become a variable that no longer fit the equation. And I realized then that 7B didn't punish rebellion, it neutralized it by making it irrelevant, by removing the need for it entirely. And the most dangerous thing it did was offer relief, even now, my screen flashing 1. Last prompt promising clarity, balance, completion, if I would only sit back down and let the system finish organizing me. And for a moment I almost did, because exhaustion makes surrender feel like wisdom. But I ran instead, not fast, not heroically, just urgently enough to stay ahead of the way the floor adjusted, doors at the end of the hallway unlocking and relocking in a sequence meant to funnel me toward acceptance rather than escape, temperature shifting to sap my strength, gravity seeming to thicken with every step. And when I finally forced open a door that wasn't meant to open yet, I found myself in a stairwell that felt wrong immediately. Steps repeating in patterns that didn't match the building's layout, floor numbers skipping and counting backward, walls smooth and unmarked like they'd never been finished. and as I descended, I felt the presence of 7B recalculating above me, extending, learning, not angry about my departure, but curious, because systems like that don't fail when someone escapes, they adapt. And when I finally stumbled out into daylight, hours later or minutes, I still can't say, the building stood behind me exactly as it always had. Directory unchanged, elevators running smoothly, no 7th floor listed at all. And for a long time I believed I'd broken something simply by refusing to stay, until the weeks passed and the world resumed its familiar grind. Deadlines, meetings, quiet burnout settling back into place. And that's when I started noticing the changes, subtle ones at first. Elevators pausing a fraction longer than they should, new project teams forming without explanation, coworkers speaking about roles they didn't remember applying for. And one afternoon at my new job, as I waited alone in the elevator after another long day, the car slowed between floors and the lights dimmed just slightly, just enough to feel intentional. And when the doors opened, they revealed not a hallway, but a temporary sign taped neatly beside the entrance. White paper, clean lettering, reading, Floor 7C, Temporary Operations. And in that moment, I understood the truth I'd been avoiding since the beginning, that I hadn't escaped the system at all. I'd helped it refine itself. Because places like that don't need to trap everyone. They only need to be available when people are tired enough to stop asking questions. And somewhere right now, someone just like me is stepping forward, grateful for the pause, relieved to have a choice made for them, unaware that the floor they're about to enter has been waiting patiently, learning from every mistake, and ready to finish what they no longer have the strength to resist.